Okay, good morning and welcome to the Planning Commission hearing of January 31st. If you join me for the flag salute. Ready to begin. Thank you. And Mr. Villalobos, if you'll do the TV coverage announcement and call the roll.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the Commission. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, San Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB TV Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on County of Santa Barbara Television's website as well as the county's YouTube channel and will be available for download in a day or two. Now for the roll call, Commissioner Park.
Present.
Commissioner Cooney.
Present.
Commissioner Farini.
Here.
Commissioner Brown.
Here.
And Chair Blau.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Wilson, are you going to do the projection report and the agenda status?
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I will give you the agenda report and projection report as well. There are 3 items on the standard agenda today, and staff is ready and prepared to move forward on all those items today. In moving to the projection report, the next meeting would have been February 7th, which was canceled at the last hearing. The other item, the next meeting is February 14th, which Commissioner Brown has indicated that she'll be absent. So we may want to take action on that today, depending on how things go, on whether or not we want to cancel that meeting. The meeting following that is scheduled in Santa Maria on February 28th. There are a number of items on that. 2 standard projects, an appeal of reservoirs in the Cuyama area, and then long-range planning has some information they will be bringing forward to you at that February 28th meeting. The following meeting after that is March 7th. Currently, there is 1 item on that agenda date. And then following that, March 14th does not have any items on it at this time. However, we might want to keep that open as things progress and as staff evaluates the status of the project. And then following that, March 28th has the SB-CAG item, Highway 101 widening project, has been placed on that date. And then the last item is April 4th, which has an appeal of a residence in the Carpinteria area. So that's the projection report.
Great. Any questions of the Commission? Commissioner Brown.
The Triple J Ready Mixed Batch Plan and Concrete Recycling, what kind of permit is that? I just was curious. Any idea offhand?
So the project is they're putting, sorry to repeat what's on the agenda, but
Right.
it's a conditions permit to
Fine.
put a ready mixed batch plant on the site.
Okay, CUP. All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Seeing no others. Mr. Cooney.
Mr. Chair, would you entertain a motion to cancel the meeting of the 14th of February?
Well, actually, you could make the motion.
Good. That's what I wanted.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
None being opposed. Great. This is a time in the hearing where we do public comment for items not on today's agenda. I do have a speaker slip, although
That's for public comment.
I understand that, but I think they're talking about asking us to postpone item 3 on today's agenda. So I guess Denise Adams, if you'd like to speak.
Good morning, Commissioners. I have 3 items that I'd like to address that are not on today's agenda. My name's Denise Adams. I'm a Spangler Adams resident of Montecito since 1980. And I would like to first request, under the circumstances that exist in Montecito, many people could not attend today for item number 3, which is important to several families in the community. Many of them still are not back at home. Many are in transit, and some of us still do not have internet service or cable service, so we're not even adequately informed. So my request was to defer item number 3. My second request is that under the circumstances of the emergency and the demands that will be placed on you as well as staff in planning and community development and zoning, that existing LUPs and building permits issued to Montecito residents who are in the mandatory evacuation area and have been displaced, that all of our building permits and LUPs be extended for a period of 5 years. There is precedent for this. It has happened before in the Painted Cave fires, where a blanket extension was issued by your commission and supported by the Board of Supervisors, so it is lawful. My third request is for you as a group to give consideration under the devastating circumstances in Montecito that it is an appropriate time to revise our community plan. It has been addressed at many community meetings that some homes and areas cannot be rebuilt. It seems appropriate that our community plan be revised so everyone in the community knows exactly what's going on. So those were my 3 issues. Thank you for your time, and I hope you'll take those under advisement. And thank you, Mr. Cooney, as our representative. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other public speakers? Not seeing any rise, no more slips. We'll go on to our director's report, I think, is next.
And
Actually, Planning Commission information report. Seeing none, seeing no lights, we'll go on. Do have 2 sets of minutes that we need to approve. The first one being for the hearing on December 20th. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Let's see, and we'll do this with a roll call.
Commissioner Park,
I'll abstain because I wasn't there.
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Freeney,
Aye.
Commissioner Brown, and Chair Blau.
Aye.
Motion passes 401.
Great. Now the hearing of January 20th. So I'll make the motion to approve the minutes for that hearing.
I'll second.
And Mr. Villalobos, if you do the roll call again.
Commissioner Park,
Again, I'll have to abstain.
Commissioner Cooney,
Abstain.
Commissioner Farini,
Aye.
Commissioner Brown, and Chair Blau.
Aye.
Motion passes 302.
Great. And now we'll go to the director's report. Mr.
Chair Blau, Commissioners, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I have a few things to report on. On the 23rd, we, at the board, they set the hearing for cannabis for February 6th. If you go to the staff report, the board letter for that, it's important to look at the memo that was recently posted, as recently as yesterday, I believe, because that board letter was actually, the set hearing was actually done before we had the action of the Planning Commission, and so it can be a little confusing if you just look at the board letter. So make sure when you look at that, if you want to look at the recommendations and see the Planning Commission's recommendation, a lot of it will be in a memo that has been recently posted. On the 23rd, they also considered taxation. Cannabis taxation. They'll be coming back with some proposals on February 6th for that, whether it'll be how much it'll be, whether it'll be a general or a special tax. I think they'll take action on that on February 6th. And then there was a report on Renew 2022, which I can characterize as a proposal to basically radically restructure county government. And they went, well, there were a number of different teams. I was on some of the teams, so was Diane and Steve Mason. And the purpose of that hearing on the 23rd was basically to say, okay, let's not have any sacred cows here, but if there's something that you just can't handle that's on this list of things that are going to be considered, let us know. And the one thing that immediately came out was the Human Services Commission. There was definitely testimony about that. But they didn't formally make a motion to remove anything from the 2022 list. So now the CEO's office will move forward on diving deeper into the proposals which were made by a number of different entities and committees, and we'll see where that goes. But again, the board did not take anything off the table. They basically said we want to hear about it all. On the 30th, we were going to hear the Montecito Architectural Guide. Yesterday, we were going to hear about the Montecito Architectural Guidelines, but they were continued until the 27th of February, as was the O'Neill residence, the one that you see when you drive south through Summerlin, and it's on the right-hand side, and it's all painted up. And there was also a report on the Montecito disaster, which and where we stand with that. And just very briefly, planning and development is going to be, we're now starting to get requests for assistance in building permits and so forth. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a team which includes development review planners. Not everybody. We're not. There was some testimony yesterday that someone had heard that, you know, the projects that development review is working on are simply put to one side while everybody works on the recovery, all the planners. That's certainly not true. We're going to have a group of 5 to 8 planners, including some planners from long-range planning and from development review, and people will have a personal relationship with their project manager. There'll be somebody assigned that they can call at any time to get through the process, and so we're moving now into that process. Also, I might mention on the 27th will be the cultural thresholds that you recommended to the boards. That board letter is now in the process of being docketed. And that's what I have today. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Mr. Cooney.
Dr. Russell, thank you. I didn't have a chance to listen directly to the meeting, so in terms of the department's role in issuing emergency permits, I assume that is going on as we speak.
If emergency permits are needed, for example, to do work, I'll just use one example. A lot of the work that the utilities were doing was exempt, inland exempt, and in the coastal exempt, except when you start talking about environmentally sensitive habitat areas, such as the creeks. So we would certainly issue emergency permits for that. If in fact there is an emergency permit needed for a private residence, we would do that as well. I don't know the extent to which emergency permits will be necessary, because most of what will be done for the private residences will be a zoning exemption and then right straight to a building permit. Our code was altered back during the T-Fire days to make it clear that if your house is destroyed by a disaster, you don't really need anything other than a zoning exemption. You don't need a zoning permit. You do not need a land use permit. But it will be, there's some difficult circumstances. The topography has changed. There may very well, but we don't know yet. It's conceivable that there might be unbuildable lots out there. Things have really, really changed, and so there will be some very there'll be some very important and difficult decisions that the county will have to make. Certainly, planning and development will not be making these decisions regarding the buildability, if you will, of some of these areas that have been so devastated.
With respect to the fast track permits, I think it's important for the public to realize, and you can confirm, or maybe it's different. If there's going to be a change in the footprint of the building, if it's not just a simple rebuild, but someone wants to add on to their structure, then that could involve the normal processing. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. If it's like for like, which under the circumstances I believe that we will be very flexible, given that someone might physically not be able to build in the same place. But if someone really wants to build a new house, a different house, that would be of a normal process. And at this point, there have been no proposals to change the permitting process. There's no deferral of fees that have been proposed. Certainly the board has the authority to do that. But at this point, what we're looking at is the regular process, the regular fees, but with a one-on-one case manager relationship between a homeowner and a planner here, so that they have someone who can take care of them as they move through the process.
All right, thank you very much.
Great, and I just make a comment. I think that in most cases, insurance companies, as part of the settlement, as part of the cost of rebuilding the building, permit fees are included. I mean, I know that when I've done restoration for people, I get reimbursed for the permit fees because you still have to have the inspector go out there and do the inspections, and the cost is still there. So anyway, it's great. Any further questions? Not seeing any. I think we can now go to our standard agenda. Mr. Villalobos, will you read item 1 into the record, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Joseph Abbott, owner, to consider case number 14 DRM2 and application and 16 CDP 57. Applications filed on August 29, 2014 and August 1st, 2016 for vesting tract map in compliance with County Code Chapter 21.
Thank you, Ms. Liu. Are you going to give us a staff report this morning?
Good morning, Chair, members of the Commission. I'm just going to give you a brief update.
Great.
As this project was before your Commission initially on December 6, 2017, your Commission then acted to continue it to today in order to allow for the applicant to consult with the Goleta Water District about the concept of transferring the water rights from his property to the Goleta Water District in exchange for a water meter. Staff has issued a memo dated January 11th, 2018, and attached to that memo is a letter from the Goleta Water District wherein they state that they're unable to do that transfer in exchange for a water meter. As a result, staff is continuing to recommend denial of the project due to inconsistency with Coastal Land Use Policy 2-4 and Coastal Zoning Ordinance Section 35-60.3, which require that new properties be served by the appropriate water district if such service is available.
Great.
And that concludes my comments.
Great. I have one question, and I think I asked this question last time, but I'll ask it again. Do you have any clue from the Water District when service might be available? Because they're saying in their letter it's not available now, and they give no indication that it could ever be available in the future.
Chair Blau and members of the Commission, I did some while back ask that question, and at this point it's unknown. It depends on the rain and the weather in the next few years, but the comment that I got from them was that they didn't anticipate it to be a indefinite situation. They anticipated it to be, a number of years, but that's all dependent upon levels of rain that we have not yet seen.
And so our coastal policy that you have on there says that it shall be serviced by them if such service is available. It's not available.
Chair Blau and members of the Commission, we consider that it is available because the project is located within the Goleta Water Service District. There's a line located less than 200 feet from the proposed lots, and the moratorium is considered to be a temporary situation based upon water availability. So sort of the crux of that argument is that it's considered to be a temporary and not permanent situation. Along that line, staff did propose to recommend a condition that the applicant could choose if they chose to propose to serve the project with Goleta Water. Then we would apply a condition to the map that required that they obtain a can and will serve letter prior to map recordation, which would allow them to secure the approval at this point in time while waiting to get that letter from the Galena Water District.
And that map is good for a maximum of 5 years, am I correct?
Chair Blau, my understanding it's 3 years with an additional 3 for an extension.
Okay. Any questions of the commission, of staff? Commissioner Park.
Yes, I do. I do want to report that I saw the entire video for the last hearing, which was a long hearing on December 6, 2017. And one reason I looked at that was to follow up on a suggestion by our county counsel, Ms. Richardson, because I was curious about this issue of what does available mean. It seemed like largely a legal issue, and I wondered if county counsel had advice on that. And the advice was that the Planning Commission has broad discretion in interpreting policies. And I noted in watching that was Ms. Richardson's advice during the hearing, and that Ms. Black also reported that there was some history of interpreting this in the planning department, but that this was a factually intensive kind of review, and that it was really the Planning Commission's determination. And I just wanted to ask from staff, both Ms. Richardson and Ms. Liu, did I understand that correctly from the December 6th hearing?
Chair, Commissioner Park, yes, you did understand that correctly.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more lights, we'll ask for the applicant if you'd like to address the podium.
Mr. Chair, while the applicant's coming up, I would just ask if there are any additional ex parte disclosures from the last hearing.
I see no lights, and there's none from me. Thank you. Actually, we need you at the podium to be on the camera, if you don't mind.
I'm sorry, but I cannot. It's because of the angle and because the thing is not in focus. I have to use my printout. Good morning, commissioners. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's been a very difficult journey for me. Now, on August 29, 2014, I submitted an application based on using the water system on my property. Not until September 5, 2017, 3 years later, when I was informed of policy 2.4 on the denial recommendation. Had I been informed of this policy on August 2014, I would have walked away a free man, unshackled, and not standing here. I'm sorry, and not standing here before you. 3 years of my life, and hard-earned lifetime savings compromised. And I think in the process, my constitutional rights are violated. I feel I was trapped, because if they told me about it, I mean, this is their business. I know some people sitting here that have decades of experience with the planning department. And to say that we didn't know about it, we only found out, it was so important, they only found out about it the last minute. As of today, it's 3 years, 5 months, or 2 days of my life. I'm not a big developer with deep pocket. I was retired 2 decades ago, so it's a big hardship on me what happened, and I think it wasn't necessary. Now let me give you an example of the logic used by the planners. On page 7 of the staff report, it says the moratorium is considered temporary and does not constitute lack of availability. I'm sorry. The fact Last moratorium lasted from 1972 until 1988. That's 16 years. Think of a word to describe a person who thinks 16 years is considered temporary. Is this democracy? For the first time of my life, I feel like I'm back in the place that my parents fled 66 years ago. I can see the picture in front of my eyes when that happened. This is not an ordinary hearing. The county legal process is being compromised. As commissioners, I ask you to pay attention, for total attention and participation for the next few minutes. In return, I promise to present accurate and precise facts in clear and orderly fashion that you will find easy to understand. We're here today because of incomplete policy, Policy 2.4. What is an incomplete policy? Think of an incomplete sentence. Why is it a big deal? Compare an incomplete sentence completed by Mother Teresa with the same sentence, with the same incomplete sentence completed by Bin Laden. Using the above analogy, an incomplete policy can be transformed into a draconian policy that does not serve the common good. And I repeat that. If you think what's happening here, it does not serve the common good. Its only sole purpose is to inflict hardship. So this is the steps I'm going to do in my presentation. Show that Policy 2.4 is incomplete by comparing it with a similar policy, the residential second unit. Planners legislated a new policy, well not allowed, totally camouflaged before the incomplete Policy 2-4. The California Government Code grants the Board of Supervisors the power to legislate and set policy. Planners violated the California Common Code by legislating a new policy, well not allowed. Well not allowed does not serve the common good and violates taking of private property. If time allows, I will show you that the new policy, well not allowed, which has taken place of the Policy 2.4, is now a misfit among its siblings, policies 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3 that preceded it, and 2.5 that followed it, which is conditions to be met in order to use the well. Why list conditions to be met if well is not allowed? I need somebody to explain to me what the contradiction. Maybe the planners can do that. And now I proceed. So here, find a policy similar to Policy 2.4, which is the RSU policy, and compare Policy 2.4 with the RSU policy to show that Policy 2.4 is incomplete. Now, I'm sorry again. If you look at Policy 2.4 and the first sentence of the RSU policy, read the one in blue. Where public water service is available. And if you read to the right, Policy 2.4, if such service is available. So they're almost the same. You read the part in green, also the same thing. Just feel free to read. So if we swap the two, except we keep the title and of course the target of the thing, like, you know, if you keep the residential second unit on the left and etc., then it'll be identical. You won't know the difference. So here I'm showing that this is a very similar policy. And yet, notice the similarity between Policy 2.4 and the first sentence. We did that. Notice the second and third sentence of the RSU policy provide important and necessary information that Policy 2.4 lacks, which confirms that Policy 2.4 is incomplete. Now, since we know a little bit about policy residential second unit, I'm going to use that as an example. While there's while the residential second unit was used to show that Policy 2.4 is incomplete, it's also a good example of a policy legislated to serve the common good. Now, notice the second sentence of RSU policy. Now, this is, we talk about policy that's identical to the policy that the planners are invoking on me. Subject to a moratorium, second unit may be served by a private well. Notice the third sentence of the RSU policy. This is the policy that I'm comparing with. Existing service is by a private well, second unit may be served by a private well. This is an example of how our dedicated, caring supervisors legislate policy serving the common good, which is a big contrast to how the planners are applying the policy to my project by modifying a policy. Planners legislate a new policy. Well, not allowed. Totally camouflaged behind this incomplete Policy 2.4. Now, planners are saying, oh, we interpreted Policy 2.4. Moratorium is temporary, even if it takes, have to wait years, 16 years. Service is available. All you have to do is wait. Maybe I'll have to wait. Maybe I won't live long enough to wait. I'm in my 80s. And what the sad part about it, it's a violation. If you peel the layers of camouflage, you find the new policy that the planners legislated, which I will distinguish with a superscript, Policy 2.4 superscript new. It means well not allowed. Now, this is very important. I need to have an understanding of this. If anybody disagrees with what I'm saying, please speak up. I specifically, Chair Blau, member of the commission, I'd like to ask your permission to ask the commissioners to see, to tell me if what I'm saying is correct, and if not, to tell me why I'm not correct. Because I'm saying the new policy that the planners are imposing on me, forget everything. All it means is those three words, well, not allowed. Well, not allowed. That's all they're saying.
Mr. Bitt, I'm going to, not going to ask the commissioners that question now. I think the issue that's before us is whether or not how we interpret 2.4, and that's, I think, what we're going to be deliberating on when you get done. I think we're down to, we understand your position and your concern, and I think if this commission makes the determination that the temporary moratorium is consistent with 2.4 in saying that you could be allowed to use your well, that will be the decision we'll make. I think it's going to come down to that.
Well, but the point here is the planners violated.
I think we understand your point. I'm just telling you that's just a decision that we have to decide whether we agree with you, your interpretation,
Thank you.
or if we agree with staff. Thank you.
Now, what we have here is the California Government Code that grants the Board of Supervisors multitude of powers by virtue of 19 government code sections. Now, if you look to the left, you see the California Government Code, and you go down the stairs to the point where you see the Board of Supervisors and the general powers and the 19 government code sections that is granted to the supervisor. The California to the right, the California Government Code grants the Board of Supervisors multitude of powers by virtue of 19 government code sections. Among these powers, the power to legislate and set policy. No one else has that power, and specifically the planners. They have no power to legislate. By modifying, by taking a incomplete sentence that I give you example, incomplete policy, I gave you example what happens when you have an incomplete sentence. They modified it. So that's legislating. That's a violation. They are not allowed to do that. This is we do not live in an independent republic. The county laws has to conform to the state laws, and the state laws conform to the federal laws, and all they are bound under the Constitution. And the California Government Code says only the supervisors are granted this power, and not anyone else. And the planners took over this power and legislated. Planners violated the California Government Code by legislating a new policy. Well, not allowed. Planner violated constitutional rights by creating a draconian policy, taking of private property. Taking of private property is against the laws, the code of the state and the federal government. It's only allowed under circumstances that benefit the common good, and not just for just fun, so to speak. It's a draconian policy that does not serve the common good and violates taking of private property. Of all the policies, now this is important, of all the policies that the Board of Supervisors adopted, none forbid the use of private well. Am I making myself clear? There's no policy that the supervisors adopted that says you cannot use your well. There are many policies that set requirements. In a matter of fact, the policy next to policy 2.4, I'll show it to you, is set requirements that need to be met. And sometimes those requirements are very difficult and not achievable. And you cannot use your well under that circumstances. But when you meet all the requirements, especially just for the geologic consultation that the planners required from me, that the last minute cost me $6,000, and to get that well in operation to meet the environmental health department and the planners requirement, because for all the time the planners would tell me I can use the well, it cost me a little fortune. And the last minute, they, through a violation and creating a policy in an illegal way, they tell me I cannot use it. The new policy that the planners legislated is a misfit. Now, if we have time, I go through that. But if I already used up my time, I'll drop that.
I think we're ready to deliberate and get you a decision, to tell you the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I don't know how to close it.
Yeah, I know that. I'm going to ask for public comment now, other than Mr. Abid. Do we have any slips? Not seeing anything. Mr. Abid, you can go ahead and sit down if you want. Thanks. Before I turn this over to Commissioner Brown to start this deliberation, I do have one question as staff, and that is, can you confirm for me that the previous moratorium was the 16 years?
Chair Blau, members of the commission, I would need to research that in order to
Okay, well, Commissioner Brown knows the district. She thinks that's probably it. That'll answer my question. Commissioner Brown, this is a second district item. How do you wish to proceed?
First of all, to Mr. Abbott, I apologize that this has happened. It's probably not enough, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult for you and very difficult for us. I would like Ms. Liu to put our options up on the screen. If you have that, I think we had that before. Did you?
Chair, Commissioner Brown, I can walk through the potential options.
Would you please?
Yes.
Just so that to enable our discussion.
Yes.
If you don't mind.
You could move staff's recommendation and recommend denial of the project. You could choose to take a different interpretation of the policy and direct staff to draft findings and a staff report for approval of the project. Or you could well, this would be subject to the applicant's agreement, but if the applicant agreed to propose to be served by the Goleta Water District, you could direct staff to write a staff report and analysis based upon a condition requiring that a can and will serve letter be required prior to map recordation. That would be subject to the applicant's proposal to do that, and then staff would write a staff report and analysis for approval of the project under that circumstance as well.
I'm going to ask a question to follow up on Commissioner Brown's question. Could there be a condition that reads something like this, that where we could interpret that he could make the connection to the existing well, and in the event that water is available through the water district prior to the issuance of any building permit for a structure, that they be required to connect to the Goleta Water District system? See, for me, you know, it's the it's the construction of the house and the connection that would trigger whether or not I connected to the well or connected to the water district. If a water district was available, our preference is to have it connected there when he builds the house. However, I understand the idea that this could be a 16 or a 20 or a forever moratorium in that water district based on water availability. And so I'm just curious. I mean, it's not like we're asking him to drill a new well. We're talking about an existing well that's already there. I probably would not agree to allow him to use a new well given the fact that he's within 200 feet of public service, but we're talking about an existing well. So I just ask if we could have that kind of condition.
Chair Blau, members of the commission, I'll step in. I think we could potentially create a condition that could address that, but I would recommend that if you wanted to entertain that, that condition would be phrased that prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall obtain a can and will serve letter from the district. So that way the trigger would be prior to any construction happening, prior to occupancy, so it would be prior to the issuance of a building permit. So at that point, he wouldn't be able to move forward unless he had a can and will serve letter. The only concern with that is there's going to be a lot of upfront costs that might get him to that point, and he'd still be in a delay before he was able to get a can and will serve letter. So that would be the only concern with that condition.
Well, I'm not sure that I care about the can and will serve letter. I care about the moratorium being lifted, because if the moratorium is lifted and he's within 200 feet, I don't think the district has the ability to say no to him. Am I correct? I mean, if you're a public agency serving and there's no moratorium and I want to get connected, you got to let me connect. So I don't think it's an issue of the can and will serve letter for me. It's the issue of, does he have the ability to purchase a water meter from the district? If he does, then he would need to do that before the permit would be issued to build the structure. If he can't, and it's the moratorium is still in effect, then I'm kind of sympathetic with him on that issue.
But doesn't that send him down a path of more expense?
No, it doesn't, only if it becomes available. Certainly, if it were available today, we probably would require him to make a connection. He'd have to buy the meter, and what it costs, I can't help him with. But my issue is he already has the well there, And so if he can't connect to the water district, why would we not let him use the existing well? It just seems to make sense. Now, if it takes 5 years before anybody builds on the property and the moratorium ends, so be it. Buy the water meter, make the connection. I'm just asking the question. I mean, you know.
Chair Palau, just clarification on the question. The way that staff is presented today, and to get some clarification, if he wanted to build on the lot today, he could use the well. What we're saying is prior to being able to, or if he does, based on your recommendation on that potential condition, what we're saying is if he subdivides the lot, he wouldn't be able to use or put in a well for both of those lots. So that condition would be that he would still be limited not to be able to use that well until he was able to connect on the new parcel that's being created.
That's correct, but they're probably not going to make those connections until there's a property to connect to a building to connect to. Do you get my drift there? Yeah, I mean, he's not going to spend any money to do the well or to modify the well or to make a connection until such time as he's ready to make the connection to the house, because he doesn't know where the lines are going to go. You know, there's other things you have to do in order to do all that. So if he wants to build now before the moratorium is over, he could use the existing well, make a connection. It's really kind of simple. It seems fair, and I think it's in line with what the policy was trying to do.
That he wants to subdivide the lots. I think that's his intent.
Yeah,
I mean,
he wants to subdivide the lots now. Let him subdivide the lots, and he can use the well to service the 2 new lots.
So, Chair Blau, just if the commission, I don't know where the rest of the commissioners are on that potential condition, but if they were wanting to move forward with staff looking into that, I would ask respectfully that we take like a 5-minute break to allow staff to kind of ferret out the issues related to that potential condition.
Let's take a 5-minute break. Thanks.
I do. There's a lot of unintended.
Okay, we're going to go back on the record. Mr. Wilson, are you or Ms. Liu going to summarize our discussion?
Chair Blau and members of the commission, I will try to summarize and recap where staff is at in our conversation. So looking at the options available to the commission today, the first option is, one, support staff's recommendation and deny the project, which is in essence supporting staff's interpretation of that policy 2.4 on availability of water within a water service district. Or two, the other option is to continue to refer it back to staff to come back with findings for approval with the adoption of a condition that indicates that prior to map recordation, the applicant will obtain connections from the water district. And that option two is as well supporting staff's interpretation of the policy. So the first two options is supporting staff's interpretation of the policy as what availability means. The third option, which we discussed with Chair Blau, is to refer it back to staff to come back with findings for approval, with working with the applicant and possibly amending his project description or with further conditions that reinterpret or interprets the policy as in that during the moratorium, water service is not available even though he's in the district, and that while he's in the moratorium, he can record his map and he can build the houses and connect those two houses to the existing well while he's in a moratorium. However, if the condition or the project description might be revised to say that if in the event the moratorium is lifted before he constructs those houses, then at that time he has to connect to water services, the districts. So those are the options before the Planning Commission today to consider and deliberate on.
Yeah, and I would just comment that Mr. Wilson accurately outlined the conditions I was proposing. Commissioner Brown.
I had a moment to speak to Mr. Abbott, and my concern with this scheme, maybe it's not a concern, it's just my inquiry, is that in doing what Commissioner Blau is proposing, it may not ultimately serve the applicant's purpose, because what he wants to do in a lot split is to sell these properties. And if he were to sell these properties under this condition, it sort of puts a cloud, I'm not sure what the right word might be, for any potential homeowner to have to deal with the consequences, the unusual situation. I'm not really entirely sure what that might mean, because we're dealing with another. I don't know. I'm sort of in left field because I don't know enough to know how that might affect a potential homeowner. That might discourage a potential homeowner because this is an irregular process and it's not. I just don't know. It's just,
well, I'll just give you my background as both a real estate broker and a general contractor. It's an unusual condition,
right,
but not one that's difficult to deal with. If I'm buying the lot and going for the purpose of building a house, I can I can make my purchase conditioned upon my ability to obtain a building permit, and I will know at that day, before I put my money up and complete the purchase, whether I'm going to buy a water meter from the district or I'm hooking up to the well system. And I would just make those deals when I get it. I will say that Commissioner Cooney pointed out to me that this is simply still in the process of doing this map. What we're doing here today is just allowing him to go forward with the rest of the process. So I'm just saying I understand the policy of wanting to connect to a public water system if it's available. So if it's available before the house is built, they got to make the connection. And whether or not he has to work that out with the purchaser, so be it. That's their condition. And I will tell you that it's my guess that the difference between making the connection to the well and buying the water meter, making the connection, it's probably more expensive to make the connection, but not that much more expensive. Because to connect to a well and do the things you have to do to put that kind of a water system in your house is not cheap. It's just not.
So here's my question, because I don't think, I have this uncertainty that it's not as straightforward as you portray it. And I feel that there might be little landmines in the process for the applicant. Should the commission go this way, and perhaps staff could explain to us if there are landmines and the impact that it might be to the applicant if this were to happen and he get to the point where he would be, sort of a landlocked position and not be able to sell these lots. I mean, I don't know.
Well, the other alternative is, I think, that staff didn't say, is for us to make the determination that the water is not available from a public source, and we'll interpret that he meets the 2.4 criteria because water's not available. No, and from what I'm hearing from Commissioner Brown, no. The last moratorium was 16 years. Yeah,
but wait a minute. I don't want to go down that road, because you're going to have every developer in the Goleta Valley going, hey, water's not available. I'm in another basin. I'm going to start. I'm not doing that. That's opens the door to so many unintended consequences.
I thought my hybrid worked really well.
Well, I'm perhaps that would be. Let's hear from the commission.
Commissioner Park.
I like the hybrid that Chairman Blouse referred to. As I understand from staff, it's really up to the commission to interpret what available means.
I don't think it's.
And when I look at what the board did with RSUs, and if we determine that available in this context under 2.4 has a completely different meaning, that would be anomalous. That wouldn't make sense. So my best shot at interpreting this is that water is not available, especially since we don't know how long the moratorium will last. And I very well remember the last moratorium, and it lasted a long time. And there was a whole lot of discussion at that time as to who was really planning land use at the time, the County Planning Commission or Goleta Water District. And I respect Water District. It's willing to take hard decisions, but we have the responsibility for the planning. I am mindful of Commissioner Brown's comment that everybody will now come up and say, well, water's not available. And I would not want to see a hodgepodge years from now of here's various parcels that applied, got approval by us because there was water not available because of the moratorium. And then what happens when water is available and when the moratorium is lifted? And then you've got this hodgepodge of parcels. And I think the answer to that is Chairman Blau's a hybrid situation. That is, it's not available. Use the well now. When it becomes available for the water district, you must hook up to it. And that should be our condition. And I think that should be our condition when we face the same kind of projects in the future. I think that solves the problem. That's where I am. One last thing, I'm sorry to intrude here, but The fact that I may agree with Mr. Abbott's legal position does not mean I agree with his statements about staff. I was offended by those statements. I think staff is offended by those statements. I'm very disappointed that they were made. And I want to be sure that by taking the legal position, no one thinks that I adopt those statements about staff.
Great. Mr. Freeney.
I want to thank Commissioner Park for putting it in those terms, and I agree with everything he said.
Mr. Cooney.
Well, I do take a different position than the majority, not because I want to. I would like to find a solution for Mr. Abbott, and I empathize with the catch-22 in which he finds himself. This is, however, a legitimate issue that is raised by staff, and I think if we are out of sympathy for Mr. Abbott to go forward and allow him to actually construct a second residence or entitle him to do that, we will encourage further development in the Goleta Valley based on the existence of wells, whether or not they're subject to the right judgment, the right case, which specifies the district can trade existing wells for water meter connections in that basin. So I think he has raised an issue that is not directly subject to the right water basin, but the principle is still there. We don't want to authorize actual construction based on an existing well being attached and the water source for a new property. It's one thing if we're talking about properties that are not now in service with the district and are subject to well use and need to modify their well or somehow their water system. I don't think that presents the problem. We're talking about pure growth, adding to the number of properties, parcels available for development, and we're doing it on the basis, a new basis of having the ability to hook up to a well. So my conclusion is this is a bigger issue than just Mr. Abbott, and out of concern for the policies of the Goleta Valley in general, I would oppose the proposed compromise, and I would adopt the option that if Mr. Abbott is willing to condition the project on obtaining water service from the district, I would go along with that.
Mr. Brown.
So before proceeding, I would like, I'm not sure how to do this, and staff, you're going to have to help me, that if, and Commissioner Blau, I'm going to take it, this is your motion.
Yes.
You could turn it into a motion.
Yes, I will.
That Mr. Abbott understand what this means, what the motion is going to mean, and to him, allow him to do or not to do, or how it's going to work, so that it's very clear, and that he, if possible, understand sort of the process that would have to occur. Because what I don't want to happen here is for us to set a motion in place without his having a really firm understanding of how it applies to him and his situation. And maybe he just needs to come to the podium and someone on staff explain it again to make sure he understands. Ms. Richardson.
That'd be great. Mr. Abbott, would you like to come to the podium again? And I'll just ask the question if that's okay. Mr. Abbott, so what you understand what we're going to be doing, if you agree, is we're going to continue this to another hearing date to give staff time to properly draft what's going to be my motion to approve your request. Understand that as you go forward with the project, if the moratorium continues to exist, you will be able to sell your lot, have someone build a house, and they connect to the well. If the moratorium goes away, then that person that built that new house is going to be required to connect to the water district line. But if the moratorium continues like it did for the last period for 16 years, you will be able to use the water well, make connection. Do you understand that and agree?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, great, thank you. Just want to make sure.
Okay.
So in that case, I think I will simply make the motion to continue this. Help me pick a date.
Before we do that, I just want to make sure that that's the direction, that's what you've discussed, that's how it's playing out, that it's...
Chair and Commissioner Brown, I do have one question or clarification. So would you be asking that if the moratorium exists prior to issuance of the building permit, they could be served by the well, and they would be served by the well in perpetuity?
Correct.
If prior to issuance of the building permit, service becomes available by the Goleta Water District, they would be required to connect to the Goleta Water District and be served by them in perpetuity?
Correct.
Well, so wait a minute. So
the circumstance would not be that after constructing the house, they would then be required to go from a well to the water district.
It's kind of a different animal.
And Chair Bell, if I could also add some, based on some of the comments and questions from the commissioners during deliberation, if the direction from the commission is directed back to staff and come back with findings for approval on this particular condition, one of the items that we'd like some direction from or policy direction from the commission is and to take into account some of the concerns that are happening as far as if the commission interprets that service is not available and because of the moratorium, then staff, in doing the policy analysis, one way of saying it is that make the finding that service is available because there is a current well on the property, as to avoid other projects coming in with no well, saying, well, the commission has proposed.
That was one of my earlier comments was I wouldn't approve it and agree to this kind of condition if there was not an existing well. The fact is he's got an existing well. He's not drilling a new one. Yeah, because I don't want to have happen what Commissioner Brown describes as a potential where everybody in the world comes in here and wants to start drilling wells on their property because of the moratorium. This is a case where he's already spent the money to put the well in there. It exists. So that's my Mr. Parks, you had your light on?
The original question was just asking for clarification, I think, by Ms. Liu. And personally, I would hope that we can impose a condition that whether the house is built or not, and whether there's, assume the house is built, assume it's got a certificate of occupancy, it's being occupied, but if at some point in time that moratorium is lifted, I would like to have a condition that they then must hook up to the water district, if that's possible. I'm not sure it is, because I don't know what you can do at that point. It's already done. But that's what I would like to see, and I think that best serves my answer to Commissioner Brown's question about having a hodgepodge of inconsistently served parcels out there.
Well, that's just not consistent with the way we do it any place else in the county. If you have an existing well and they put service in your street, whether you connect or not is up to you. The problem with what you're proposing is you've now doubled the cost of water because you're paying for both systems.
But this is the Goleta Water District we're dealing with. It's different. So I don't know, Commissioner Farini, perhaps.
I think this is a very special case. I think there's been confusion and we have the opportunity to bring some clarity. I don't intend this to be precedent setting. I just think that we should move forward with it. I would continue to support Commissioner Blau's motion and hope that we could get this passed.
So, Commissioner, let me make sure I understand. The motion would include that this in perpetuity thing with the well, that there be no require for them to connect. Is that?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, and also speaking to Commissioner Park's concern, we could also craft a condition that stated that if at some future point in time the property were redeveloped and we'd need to establish what level of redevelopment we're talking about, it could be a demo or a rebuild perhaps, we could potentially write a condition that would require that at that point in time, if service was available, they would connect. I do not know of a mechanism by which we could compel someone to connect to Goleta Water after they had already constructed using a well.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, well.
Why don't you just call the motion?
I'm going to. Okay. So I'm going to move we continue it to. Let's see when.
Well, how about let's just do in the motion and see where we are.
Okay.
That might be better before deciding on a date.
I'll continue to, we'll pick a date here in a minute, so the staff could come back with a condition that says, as Mr. Wilson described it, that if prior to the issuance of the building permit, water is available to be connected to the district, it would be required to be district. If not, then they could connect to the well. And there's no requirement to connect later on. I mean, it's just stays that way. That's my motion.
Second.
Great. Now let's. Do you want to have the?
We need to do a roll call.
Okay. Let's do a roll call, and then I'll pick the date for the continuance.
Mr. Chair, if we could just perhaps have the date as part of the motion.
Okay.
Before voting.
Okay.
That's fine. We're back here February 22nd. We're all here. Is that correct? Oh, you're not here? Oh, 28th. I'm sorry. You're right.
28th. That's Santa Maria. Santa Maria.
Let's do March
7th.
March 7th. Yeah, we only have one item there. Yeah,
So-
March 7th.
Chair Blau and members of the commission. So for your consideration, picking a date, another option would be.
Well, let me ask you this. Do we really need to do that, or is that motion so simple you guys can just take it and continue with it?
It'd be for noticing purposes. So continuing to a date specific addresses the noticing requirements that we have.
I'm just asking if we actually need to continue it, or can we just take my motion and you guys can go forward and we've made the interpretation, we changed the condition, he's got to continue to process the map. We're not done seeing this.
If it makes a difference, Commissioner Blau, I don't think I'll be here on March 7th.
Okay.
I'm going to have to be out of town.
I'm just going to see if we needed to continue it
Yeah.
all
So
first.
Chair Blau, if you just want to direct it to staff to come back at another date,
Date uncertain.
a date uncertain, then we'll just end up re-noticing the project. But that would give staff time to work with the applicant as well as coming back with the appropriate policy analysis and findings and conditions of approval. So tentatively, staff's looking at March 14th. It is scheduled for Santa Maria. There are no other items on that date, but that's a potential date that we
I
would
won't
have.
be here that day.
Well,
March 14th.
you know what? I like your idea of some date certain when we're all here, date you pick out. And the reason I don't care if it takes a long time to get back to us is that he's in the process of continuing with the mapping process. This has got to come back to us for the final approval of the map, I think. So it's not going to cause him a delay. Staff just now has got directions to continue processing the map and
Date
to go
uncertain.
forward. Date uncertain.
But we still need findings to support an approval. Staff has presented the very simple findings for rejection.
Oh,
So
I get that. I'm just saying it doesn't matter when they bring it back to us, whether it's March or April or June, because it's not going to interfere with his ability to continue to process his map. So get your findings, do whatever, get the project description changed, come back to us when it's, when you're complete and you can renotice it. Does that work? That's my motion. Any further comments? Mr. Brown, your lights on?
We're going to take a vote.
Yeah. So, Mr. Villalobos, if you'll call the roll.
Oh,
Wait, you have
we're
more?
just voting on the continuance, right?
Correct.
We're not,
No.
we're not voting on the motion. We don't have findings to support your motion today, so.
No, it's continuance and giving staff direction to do what I ask them to do.
Right.
To come back with the findings based on
Right.
my description. Is that clear
Okay,
enough?
well, let me be clear, I don't object to the continuance.
Okay.
But I am going to oppose the motion.
Okay, great. So, Mr. Villalobos,
Commissioner Park,
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney,
No.
Commissioner Farini,
Aye.
Commissioner Brown,
No.
Chair Blau.
aye.
Motion passes 3-2.
Great. We'll take another 5-minute break and get set up for the next item. Thanks. Okay, we're going to go back on the record. Mr. Villalobos, if you read our next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Courtney Taylor, attorney for Marco and Sarah Suppet, owners to consider the appeal case number 17 APL 20, application filed on November 3rd, 2017, of the Planning and Development Director's decision to deny a land use permit case number 17 LUP 270, and to determine that the denial of the land use permit is exempt from the provisions of CEQA pursuant to State CEQA Guidelines Section 15270.
Great, and now I'll ask for site visits next parte. Mr. Brown.
I had a phone conversation with the applicant's attorney yesterday, Ms. Taylor, Courtney Taylor.
Mr. Park.
Yes, and I had a telephone conversation with a friend of mine who's a longtime vintner, Michael Benedict, discussing the distillation process and how that applies to wineries.
Okay, and I also had a conversation with Ms. Taylor, who, by the way, her partner is considered my godson, but that doesn't make any difference. I'll still be fair to you, regardless. Okay. Staff report, Ms. Eddy.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. My name is Dana Eady, and I will be giving the staff presentation this morning for the Suhut's appeal of the denial of their permit application for a new craft distillery. The project site is located on the north side of Highway 246, and it's approximately 5 miles west of the city of Buellton. The subject parcel is approximately 10 acres in size, and it's located within an area of the county that is zoned for agricultural uses. Surrounding uses consist of vineyards, row crops, some cattle and equestrian operations, and some low-intensity residential development. So this is the overall site plan. The project site is developed with a number of different structures, including a single-family dwelling that's located on the northern portion of the site. There are some barns down here on the southern end, and then some other just animal shelters and fenced pastures. The land use permit project description requests to convert an existing 3,000 square foot barn that's located here on the southern portion of the site to a new proposed craft distillery. And craft distilleries are not listed as a permitted use in the Land Use and Development Code. And so the application requests that the distillery be permitted as a winery under the winery provisions of the LUDC. So staff's review of the permit application determined that the permit requirements for wineries do not apply to the manufacturing and distribution of distilled alcohol such as brandy and vodka. The permit application states that it would that the distillery would produce approximately 850 cases of brandy and vodka annually, and that would be from fruit that is grown on the project site and also from elsewhere within the county. The land use permit application was found to be inconsistent with the LUDC, and it was denied An appeal of the decision was filed by the applicant, and the appeal application states that the proposed distillery is consistent with the LUDC definition of a winery, and that distilleries can be approved under the winery section of the code since the production of spirits is compatible with the production of wine. The appellants also state that the permit denial conflicts with a previous pre-application determination and emails from P&D staff. The LUDC defines a winery as an agricultural processing facility that is primarily used for the commercial processing of grapes or other fruit products to produce wine or similar spirits, or the re-fermenting of still wine into sparkling wine. And the definition specifies that processing consists of controlled fermentation combined with any of the following: crushing, blending, barrel aging, and bottling. And the types of similar spirits to wine that could be produced within a winery would be limited to these processes. And brandy and vodka is produced through the process of distillation, and distillation is not listed as one of the allowed processes within the winery definition. Craft distilleries are not listed in the LUDC as a permitted use, and the permit requirements for wineries are specific to the production of wine or similar spirits to wine, and the operation of a winery as defined by the LUDC. And the development standards that are found in the winery section of the code therefore do not apply to the production and tasting and marketing of distilled spirits or to special events that might include the tasting and marketing of distilled spirits. Staff's pre-application response to the applicant in 2016 indicates that the project would fall under the provisions of a Tier A winery, and that was under the winery ordinance amendment language, which was in process at that time, but ultimately didn't get adopted by the county. And upon further review of the permit requirements under the subject land use permit application, staff determined that the winery permit requirements do not apply to distilled spirits, since the development standards in the section are specific to wine production, and distillation is not listed as an allowed process in the definition of a winery. So in order to permit a distillery in the agricultural zone, text amendments to the LUDC would be required. So staff's recommendation is to deny the appeal, make the required findings for denial of the project, including CEQA findings, determine that the denial of the project is exempt from CEQA, and affirm de novo the director's decision to deny the land use permit. And thank you. That concludes staff's presentation.
Any questions from the commission? Not seeing any. Ms. Taylor, did you want to address the commission?
Yes, and actually my clients are going to...
Great, that's fine.
We've got a presentation. Thank you, Dana. Good morning. My name is Sarah Suput. My husband and I are very grateful for the opportunity to present before you today. In the interest of time, this is our agenda, but we're just going to jump right to it. This is our family. Marco and I were married in 2012. We have 2 sons, Maxim and Dylan. They are 4 and 2. They are currently in school at Children's Montessori of Lompoc. Marco and I met back in 2010, and at the time, Marco was a chemical engineer. I worked in leadership at a nonprofit. But once we began to form a family together, we knew very early on that we wanted to be in business together. In addition, Marco and I had a big desire to leave our suburban lifestyle and move to ag land. We wanted to raise our children near livestock, near farming, to know that that food doesn't originate in supermarkets but is grown on land, and we wanted that lifestyle for our family. Marco's family is originally from Serbia. There he learned the process of distilling fruit brandies. It's very common for small farmers to take their abundance of fruit, most commonly plums, but also apricots and apples, and quince, to form lovely clear eau de vie, is what you would say in French, rakia in Serbian, and it's a process that we've enjoyed as a family for quite some time. Because Marco's background is in chemical engineering, and because we found a growing niche market for distilled fruit spirits, we thought that we could do this as a family here in Santa Barbara County. Marco's going to explain a little bit more about what distilling actually entails.
Yeah, I have a couple of slides on distilling, and then I want to walk you through a timeline of how we got here with the county. So first of all, what we plan on doing is to incorporate distilling into our winemaking process. All of the products that we will produce on site will be made from grapes and fruit. A lot of that will be grown on site by us, and also a large portion will actually be recycled byproduct from the local wine industry. So as you may or may not know, a lot of winemakers, when they make things like blends, will end up dumping a lot of their wine down the drain. Or if they have too much juice one year and not enough fermenters, they'll dump a lot of juice down the drain. We plan on sort of recycling a lot of this byproduct and converting it into spirit by distilling it. Our operation is basically all of the same exact processes as a winery with the additional step of distilling. When distilling wine is essentially getting concentrated into a higher alcohol spirit, it's actually a separation process. You separate the alcohol from the wine through distillation. So as a process, distillation is first you place the wine in a copper kettle. So we have ordered a handmade copper kettle from Serbia. It's 100 gallons. It'll hold about 100 gallons of wine. You boil that wine. The vapor that comes off initially is very high in alcohol because ethanol has a lower boiling point than water. So you capture that vapor through a condenser. It's basically a copper tube that goes through a water bath. Once the vapor is chilled, it condenses, and what comes out of the still is spirit. It is a clear spirit. No matter what you distill, you get a clear spirit. So whiskey is clear, rum is clear, tequila is clear, everything's clear coming off the still. The only way it gets color is through aging in oak barrels. So we plan on aging, and the aging in oak barrels is basically the same as wine. You place your product in an oak barrel, it sits there for 6 months to 6 years, and then it's ready for bottling. We do plan on aging some of our spirits. Grape brandy and apple brandy taste best when aged, but apricot brandy actually tastes best right off the still with a little bit of water. Fragrant of apricots, delicious dry. So we plan on bottling our apricot brandy clear, unaged. This further processing of wine that's already being processed in the facility does not result in increased impacts. What we mean by this is there are no significant noises associated with distilling or odors associated with distilling. Obviously, there's an increase in energy for boiling all this wine. But we actually think that energy will be more than offset by the lack of things like refrigeration. We don't need a lot of cooling, and we don't need conditioned rooms for our barrel storage like a winery does. In wine aging, a big concern is spoilage of wine and bacterial infection. With a high alcohol spirit, that's just not a concern because bacteria can't survive in spirit. In fact, the reason the best whiskeys come out of Kentucky is because there's so much variation in temperature over the year. Hot summers, cold winters, and kind of like we do here. Hot summers, cold winters, even the day to night variation in where we live is so significant that aging of the spirit will actually be accelerated and improved by that temperature variation. So that's what I mean by no increase impact. This is kind of a graphical representation of that process. So you see making wine, it goes from grape to fermentation, and then the winemaker has some options. If you want to just bottle your fermented wine, it'll usually, a fully fermented wine will be about 15% alcohol. At that point, the yeast cannot do any more fermentation, and the wine is very dry because all the sugars have been consumed. Now, if a winemaker wants to reduce the alcohol content, say, their cab is always 13.5, and they want to put it out at 13.5, but this year the grapes were extra sweet, and you came out with a 15% wine. One of the options for reducing alcohol is actually to distill some of it out. So there are operations. I actually applied for a job in one of them in Napa that distill wine to lower the alcohol content. So the stuff that's left in the kettle will get lower and lower and lower in alcohol until you stop distillation. So if you want a 12% wine, you can stop distillation at 12%, you have a 12% wine. On the other side of that, on the right side, you can increase alcohol content by distilling all of the alcohol out and producing a brandy, the spirit that comes out of the still. The third thing that a winemaker could do is fortify their wine by putting some of this distilled spirit back into the wine in order to produce a fortified wine. So examples of this are port, sherry, vermouth, Marsala wine. All these wines are fortified, either red or white, are fortified with spirits for various reasons. If you put spirit in a wine that is still fermenting, some of the sugar is left over, so you have a sweet fortified wine. If you fortify dry wine, you have a dry fortified wine. Things like that. It adds some flavor. It also preserves the wine, so it's added as a preservative as well. So basically, through the same process with the added step of distillation, you can have 3 different finished products: a wine that is slightly lower in alcohol, a spirit that is higher in alcohol, or a fortified wine that is somewhere in between. Now I'd like to talk you guys through the timeline of our project. So like Sarah said, we decided a few years ago that we wanted to live on agricultural land to start a farm business. And because of my engineering background and my distilling background, we thought that a farm distillery would not only fit a nice niche in this region, but also be a very interesting and great business for us to pass on to our kids. So we found 2 potential locations in the summer of 2016. both of them right off Highway 246 between Buellton and Lompoc in the Santa Rita Hills region. Very known for Pinot Noir grapes, as you know, and Pinot Noir grapes make some of the best brandy out there, so we thought this was ideal for us. So we contacted Brett Jones and hired him as a consultant for our application process because it was unclear what type of application we would need to start a distillery on ag land. So we worked with Brett to do a pre-application with planning and development in July 2016. In October of 2016, we got a response to our pre-application stating that a craft distillery would, quote, most closely fit under the requirements for a Tier A winery, which is permitted with a land use permit. A note here, like Dana said, a Tier A winery is from the proposed winery ordinance, which you know was voted down. However, the same winery definition exists in as a Tier 1 winery in the current land use code. A couple of days after that response, I actually contacted Dana to sort of ensure that distillation would be included as an allowed process. As she read the definition of a winery before, you see that there's these 5 processes that are listed there specifically: fermentation, crushing, blending, aging, and bottling. So because distillation is not included, I wanted to sort of cover all my bases, so I sent Dana an email asking, would distillation be allowed, because distillation is in fact the only way to make a spirit. Dana said she had to confer with long-term planning, and a couple days later I got a response from staff saying that, quote, although the winery definition does not specifically state distillation as an allowed process, it could be allowed provided that distillation is only used to make spirits from grapes or other fruit products, which is allowed per the winery definition. We were fine with that. We planned on planting fruit trees and growing fruit on site and using local grapes for our product, so that was perfect for us. So we took these 2 statements, that a craft distillery would fit as a Tier 1 winery or a Tier A winery, and the fact that distillation could be allowed provided that you're only distilling fruit. We took this as a green light to purchase a property in the Santa Rita Hills. So we actually took our life savings, we sold our house in Redlands, and borrowed $1.3 million to purchase the property in question based on this recommendation. We moved in actually the day after Thanksgiving, 2016, and then after the wettest winter on record, we, in March, started planting our orchard. So you see Sarah there driving our little tractor, tilling the orchard. And you see Maxim and Sarah are planting one of our apricot trees, along with a lot of our friends came out. It was a very fun day. And Dylan, I think, is supervising there with a clipboard. In July, we submitted our application for a land use permit. We were also granted a federal distilled spirits permit in July as well. In October, our land use permit was denied because, quote, and this was from the director's letter, quote, distillery is not a use listed as a permitted use within the land use code. This is the first time we'd heard this reason. In November 3rd, we filed our appeal, and then here we are today. Thank you for your time. I'll hand over to Courtney to talk through the definitions.
Good morning, Chair Blau, Commissioners. So wanted to just, I know Dana had already walked you guys through the definition of a winery, but just wanted to again emphasize that this top section is the current definition of a winery in the Land Use and Development Code. And you can see it specifically says it's a facility, agricultural facility that processes grapes or, not and, or other fruit products to produce wine or, again, not and, similar spirits, or the re-fermenting of still wine into sparkling wine. So it's specifically listed that you can make wine or similar spirits. Now, the proposed use that Marco has walked you through, we argue is consistent with this definition. The staff report talks about that we've got this list of these 4 things that are the allowed processes within a winery, and because distillation is not included, that it would then be an excluded, not allowed use. And then also that the definition of spirits, because they can only be made through distillation, similar spirits is not really an allowed product. But if similar spirits is included in this definition, because you have to use distillation to make them, distillation ergo must be an allowed use. So kind of blowing this out a little bit further, so the staff report talks about, again, distillation is not allowed because it's not listed as fermentation, crushing, blending, barrel aging, bottling. The reality is that this cannot be an exclusive list because otherwise you couldn't produce a white wine that requires pressing. The wines would be cloudy, they require clarification and filtration processes, and you couldn't make fortified wines because you need distillation to make fortified wines. So if we want to interpret this definition as defining expressly these 5 things are the only things allowed in a winery, you're going to have basically every winery in the entire county out of compliance because they are doing these other things. These are standard procedures in a winery. So as far as the definition of what a spirit is, the staff report references similar spirits as maybe including something as champagne. As we saw here, this definition of a winery specifically talks about re-fermenting of still wine into sparkling wine as a separate clause after an or from the similar spirits. So similar spirits are not champagne. And also, there is no definition of champagne as a spirit, and there's no definition of wine that serves as a spirit, that defines it as a spirit. So spirit is a separate and distinct product that the winery definition does allow. I don't see how you can interpret that any differently. So that's what we're asking the commission to do today, is to give some direction to staff on what all this means. As far as looking at the location a little bit further, you can see the parcel, subject parcel in the middle. It's currently surrounded by vineyards, future vineyards, and farming. The Suputs propose to put fruit, grapes, other ag uses on their parcel. It is completely consistent with what the neighbors are doing and the surrounding character of this part of Highway 246. We also have neighbor letters from every single neighbor. All 4 adjacent neighbors have submitted full support. They understand what the Suputs are trying to do as far as adding distillation. And the wine industry locally has expressed full support of having them open a brand new distillery in this location. So we don't believe, as everybody knows, sometimes when you have neighbors that aren't in support, that can be an issue. Here we have full transparency with the neighbors, and they are fully supportive of this project. As far as the site plan, Dana walked you through this. Again, this is a conversion of an existing barn structure. This is not new construction or taking ag land out of production to do this. A little bit of a closer look so you can see there's a couple different structures. This was formerly a, I don't know what you call it. A llama ranch. I was going to call it a llama farm, a llama ranch. Hence why there's all these pasture areas that would, of course, be removed to put various fruit trees in. Here's some photos of the existing site. So you can see it's a fairly low profile, simple barn. As far as looking at the winery development standards, this proposed project meets all of them. They are more than willing to have 2 acres planted for every 1,000 cases produced. They are more than willing that their cases will not exceed 20,000. They're not proposing a tasting room. They would like private visitations by appointment only if possible. The structure development obviously doesn't exceed 20,000 square feet because they're converting a portion of an existing structure that at its biggest is 6,000 square feet. And they're not proposing any special events. As far as the general development standards, obviously, as we've discussed, most of the fruit and wine grapes would be coming from the parcel, and most definitely all of them from within Santa Barbara and San Luis counties. So I'm going to pass it back to Marco to kind of wrap up and answer. I don't know if the commission has any questions at this point.
Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, I just wanted to wrap up and sort of summarize that, you know, we are proposing a small family operation. Sarah and I will be the only employees for the foreseeable future. We'll continue to promote and expand the agricultural character of the land. What we're proposing is taking, 10 acres or probably 6 or 7 acres of pasture land and turning it all into orchard and vineyard. Our proposed project is consistent with the definition of a winery. Definition includes the processing of fruit into spirits. We think that's unambiguous. And our project is consistent with all of the development standards. We're not asking for anything out of the ordinary, we feel like. We have the support of all of our neighbors and the local wine industry. We're excited to collaborate with local wine industry, and we've had conversations with a lot of winemakers who are excited for us to get started. That is all. Thank you very much, commissioners, for hearing us out.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown has a question.
So you've outlined here that local vintners do take other actions in the processing of grapes to various products, the fortified wines that you described.
Right.
In doing that, are the processes similar to what you're proposing in terms of boiling or whatever, distilling?
I know of certain winemakers, several winemakers who make fortified wine. I don't know exactly what their process is. They have to add spirits, obviously, to the wine. Now, you can purchase spirits from outside the county and add them to the wine, or you can contract somebody to take your wine. Like the best way to fortify a wine is to add a spirit of your wine. So you can ship your wine somewhere else, get it done that way.
And is your process, because there's heating involved, which is somewhat a different process, I think, than winemaking, which is sort of benign. I guess it's just sort of, there's no temperature involved with it.
Right.
Is that in any way sort of hazardous? I mean, do you have to sort of control the temperatures and do something different?
Yeah,
that
absolutely. So the thing about a still is that it's an open system.
Yeah.
It's not a closed system anyway. So that copper tube that goes from the kettle to the condenser is completely open. So it's not a pressure vessel.
Okay.
So that reduces the risk a little bit. It is still producing a flammable vapor, right? The alcohol vapor is flammable, which is why the fire department is always more involved in the permitting of a building permit for a winery. So of course, sprinkler systems. There is most of the winery, most of our building will be an F1 occupancy, which is the standard winemaking or beer making occupancy. But the part where the still is will be a H3 hazardous occupancy, which means an extra sprinkler system.
And that's it?
Yeah.
There's no other sort of, I don't know, whatever wineries do beyond that other than the sprinkler system?
That's it.
Or a separate room, or?
No, that's the only requirement is to have a sprinkler system if you are producing more than, or if you have more than 60 gallons of spirits in storage, sort of on site, unprocessed, so not bottled or in barrels. So if you're making spirits and you have 60 gallons in a drum, if you have more than that, you have to have a sprinkler system. That's the only requirement for the occupancy.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Burke.
Yes, I also have a question, Mr. Suput. And it again goes to distillation. This is a confusing ordinance that we're dealing with because it does talk about spirits, and spirits aren't wine. I mean, spirits are something where there's been distillation. But then we have that list of processes, and it doesn't include distillation. So I'm thinking here, okay, well, is there part of normal winemaking that involves distillation? And I think that there generally isn't to increase the alcohol content. Now, I'm kind of intrigued by your comment earlier that distillation is used to reduce alcohol content. I know in this region, in this state, we have a lot of Pinots and Cabs that are produced where there is sort of a dilution to get the alcohol content down, but I don't know the process for that. So I'm asking you this: how common is distillation used as a process to reduce alcohol content?
So there's several ways to reduce alcohol content, right? You can add water into the wine, which will dilute the flavor and dilute the wine. So I think most winemakers would not love to choose that option. The other option is to add juice back into the wine, which will make a sweeter wine. So again, not a great option for a dry wine. So this sort of distillation, it becomes the best option because you're adding the actual wine back into the wine by taking some of the alcohol out. I don't, unfortunately, know how widely it is used. The company that I applied for is in Sonoma, that job. So they're a pretty big company that does this exclusively. So they take other winemakers' wine, distill it down to a certain level, to whatever level they want, and ship it back to them.
So where are most winemakers doing this distillation to reduce alcohol content?
That I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just so curious about that because I think of distillation as really sort of an industrial process. It isn't typical of what we see at a winery, and I think it would surprise a lot of people in the wine industry to think that distillation was part of what they do. But it's a very tricky question, and thank you for your answers.
It is. Thank you.
Mr. Brown.
So just thinking about the process, and this is not, there are other agricultural processes that do distillation.
There are, yeah. You can distill ethanol fuel. One of the other permits for a federal permit for a distillery is to distill ethanol fuel or industrial ethanol. Now that's not what we're proposing. I think that's a much more industrial process.
Right.
The scope of our project, we have 100 gallons still, so we'll be making about 30 gallons of spirit at a time.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. I do have 4 speaker slips. First one is David and Gail Slay.
Hello, and thank you for allowing us to speak. Sarah and Marco are neighbors, and we own the property adjacent to them off Highway 246. And we are in full support of the project. We've known them the year that we've been there, and we're in the hospitality business ourselves. We own 2 restaurants in Orange County, and we also make wine. And one thing that we know from what we sell is Santa Barbara is such a popular name. It's just not the region, it's just not the wine, but when we have tourists in, Santa Barbara is such a destination, and to add to it, Santa Rita Hills, that is really icing on the cake. And to have a distillery that hasn't been done is something that I think what Marco and Sarah have for their plan would be a quality product that when someone comes into our restaurant, especially foreigners, they're looking for Santa Barbara, Santa Rita Hills. A lot of them will say Napa, a lot will say Cab, but the sachet and the quality that Santa Rita Hills brings is really far superior than most Pinots in California. We think what they would do would be a plus, and we're in full support.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Angie Horn.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm a Solvang resident full-time. My address is 1532 Mission Drive. I have known Sarah for 18 years. We used to work together at the nonprofit, and then I've known Marco for 8 as a friend. I'm a small business owner in Solvang, wine drinker, and then I'm on the board for the Solvang Visitors Bureau. I'm really just here to voice my full support for their project. I love the family. I love the idea. And as somebody who loves the San Ynez Valley, I think it's a great addition. And they are the kind of community members that we all want. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Matt Eaton.
Hi, my name is Matt Eaton. I work at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I have known Sarah for 9 years and Marco for 8 years, and I'm just here to, again, advocate on their behalf. I'm a resident of Solvang, California. I live at 1865 Laurel Avenue. I've known Sarah professionally as a coworker and also as a friend, and I've known Marco as a friend as well. I think their experience and the effort and the mindfulness they've put into this project is incredible. I personally have been to the site several times, helped them plant trees, worked right alongside their sons. So I believe both in their professional experience, their dedication to the project, their dedication to doing it right in every way possible. I also have several close friends that are winemakers in the Santa Rita Hills and in the surrounding areas, and they're also fully aware of the project. They've come to know Sarah and Marco in the time they've been here, and also support the project. So,
great, thank you.
Thank you.
Ty and Rebecca Smith.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Smith, and this is my husband, Ty Smith, and our daughter, Kylie, is joining us. I'm sure you have heard her. We also live in Solvang at 942 Friedensburg Canyon. We've lived in the valley for the last year and a half, but have both spent our entire lives in Santa Barbara County. We've known the Suputs since they moved to the valley also a year ago, and we work locally for a nonprofit working in international relief. And we fully support this project. We've walked along them this past year and heard the process and what they're going through, and we fully support it. It's just one more thing that will bring people to Santa Barbara County and spend their money. So we fully encourage you to approve this project. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Those are my last speaker slips. Anybody else wish to approach the podium? Not seeing any, I'll close the public comment and bring it back to the commission. Any further comments from staff?
Chair Blau and Commissioners, no further comments.
Okay, questions from commissioners? Mr. Freeney, this is in the 4th District. How do you want to proceed? I'm sorry, Commissioner Freeney, yes.
Was that?
Go.
Yeah, okay. Well, I understand the, I guess, the potential for confusion here. We have re-fermenting, and then we have, right in our ordinance, we have spirits. And if I look up spirits, that's distillation of alcohol. As the applicant showed us, if we took everything literally, then there would never be any advancements in winemaking. And part of staying in business is advancing and evolving. So for me, it's pretty simple. It says spirits, and I would move that we go forward with
approval.
With the the appeal, right?
Yeah, approve the appeal.
Approve the appeal.
Great.
Not approve staff's decision, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, Commissioner Park.
To me, this is a really tough one, and I do have a couple of questions of staff. We're trying to interpret an ordinance that was adopted by the board, of course, and so we're looking at the board's intentions. And I think that the board, in thinking through whether to include or not include distilling in that definition of winery, would be thinking, okay, how does that impact the rest of the wine industry? How does it impact the rest operation of our ordinances? And I wouldn't normally try to ignore the merits of a particular project and just say, well, what's the impact countywide? But here I think the board would have been thinking about that in determining their intention. So can you address that question? If we now include distilleries as wineries by definition, how does that fit in with the rest of the winery regulation and industry in this region? I hope that's a question you can understand at least.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Park. So I didn't look into the research. I'm not sure if the board did or did not omit the word distillery or not. Certainly by opening up including the distillation, you're now bringing in a higher level alcohol content that was a little higher than the wine and the development standards that have that. So I think when you look at the winery ordinance section, or the section of the LUDC that speaks to wineries, I think you're also looking into, okay, well, how does that affect, the wine tasting? Does that, and now you're having distillery tasting and special events, and are you going to allow for events that include a higher alcohol content with distilled spirits? So I think this is our first one, so it's hard to answer that question without, not having any qualitative information. But there certainly would be an overlap and it would expand into the winery development standards and criteria in a way where we have not really contemplated that fully yet. And so that was part of the wrestling with this staff report, is there's just no information, but it does open up a component to the wine tasting distilled spirits operations that I don't think the board probably contemplated when they did adopt the ordinance.
I have a follow-up question, and I think we all acknowledge that there's a great deal of regulation, a lot of laws in both the state and federal government that regulate distilleries differently than wineries. But if we determine that this use is not a winery under the ordinance, is it possible for this applicant to proceed to get a CUP? Is it a permissible use in a CUP?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Park, the short answer would be no. There's not a, it's not a, if a distillery is not determined to fall within the winery standards, then it's not allowed use in the land use development code. So, you know, then what is the option for the applicant to move forward? And one could be a text amendment. We haven't thoroughly evaluated that. There's probably several sections, maybe the winery section, egg processing section, that could be contemplated by your commission at a later date to amend the land use development code to include the operation of distillation.
I have a follow-up question. Tell me how you create spirits without distillation.
Mr. Chair, so I'll be honest with you, that's one of the conundrums of the definition where it talks about spirits.
I have to agree with Commissioner Farini. I mean, if it talks about spirits and the only way you can have spirits is distillation, it seems to me, although it doesn't specifically say so, it was intended. And I'll just make another comment. I spent on my little cruises in Oregon. One of the day trips was visiting wineries, and up there it's quite often that the winery, quite frequent that we would go in there and it had wines and spirits that were made in the same complex. I mean, it's rampant up there, and it was kind of fun to taste things other than wine. I had some really wonderful bourbons and some other things that were there, but I mean, it says spirit in the ordinance. And if there's no other process other than distillery to do spirits, how can you not allow it? I will tell you, there are some tasting rooms, I think, in Buellton now that have hard liquors. I'm sure there's some in the city of Santa Barbara, I don't know. But for me, I just don't see how you could not allow the distillation if it says you can do wine and other spirits. I just don't get that. Mr. Cooney, do you want to weigh in before Commissioner Farini makes some kind of a motion?
Yes, thank you. You know, for me, it's the heart of the problem here is an ambiguous code provision, and we're asked to interpret it's not usual that we do this. I'm recalling, however, that we were faced with an application by an agricultural operation that grew olives and wanted to add a processing of the olives into olive oil, and our code just didn't clearly provide that could be done on an Ag 2 property. So we had to go through a process to amend the ordinance, which we did, and we agreed. I think both we and the board agreed that it was appropriate, and this wasn't going to cause a problem for the neighbors, for the county, and so far as I know, we haven't seen another at least appeal of a permit. Maybe there have been other olive oil operations permitted in the meantime. We're asked to interpret using all the factors available to us, and if it weren't for the word spirits, I would say, gosh, you know, we have to do that. We have to amend the ordinance in order to permit the use that you're asking for. By throwing in the word spirits, I think the drafters of the ordinance were trying to imagine all the processes that the typical grape winery handles. And so, you know, how much of a jump is it here? I think it's relatively small. I can't see any strong policy reasons why we shouldn't broadly interpret the ordinance in the existing language. If council feels that we need to revise the ordinance, that can be a separate proposal, but I'd be inclined to support this operation as it's described to us and as it's been presented. You know, innocently, I think we gave the applicant the impression that we thought it was their proposed distillery operation was included, and so to stand in their way and prevent them from moving forward with their goals would be unfortunate at least, and a miscarriage at greatest. So if Commissioner Farini moves to interpret the ordinance in accordance with the applicant's proposal, I would support it.
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. A question. I think, Mr. Zorovich, you said that distilleries were regulated differently. How is that? How are they regulated differently than a winery?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, I'm not sure if I made that distinction. I think maybe the applicant did, because there's different, under the different licensing boards that they're regulated differently.
Oh, that
but,
way.
But for us, you know, we do it through the Land Use Development Code.
Okay, so through the county, they wouldn't be different other than if you had a set of standards, they'd be all those standards. It's just the ABC folks or whoever who would regulate them differently than a winery is what you intended to say.
Chairman Blau, Commissioner Brown, yes, that it's regulated through the ABC.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, differently. Okay. No, it's to me this is similar to our olive oil processing problem that we saw a while ago, and I think it's just this this interpretation. It's interesting that the word spirits is in there. I think it may, who knows what the author of this language meant, but now it's subject to interpretation, and I don't see any reason why we couldn't allow this distillery to be allowed. So I'm in support of upholding the appeal.
Great. Mr. Park, you have more?
Yeah, just one brief add-on. I've come around to supporting the motion as well, because I think we're here to serve the public and be practical. And we didn't draft the ordinance. Staff didn't draft the ordinance. Nobody here in the audience drafted the ordinance. It came out of the Board of Supervisors. And if they don't like this result, then they need to revise their very ambiguous ordinance. So I would support Mr. Farini's motion.
Yeah, okay, great. And actually, we did have a hand in the ordinance, but that's okay.
No, that's the old ordinance.
But it may not be anybody here, but it was a planning commission that made a recommendation to the board. So, Mr. Wilson, you have something more?
Yes, Chair Blau and Commissioners, it looks like there might be a potential to uphold the appeal, and if that's the direction of the board, staff would ask if the motion would be to continue the item and allow staff to come back with the appropriate findings for approval. At this point, we don't have those information we needed to support the project today.
Okay, and even though the next one is in February 28th, I'm pretty certain that the applicant wouldn't care if we continue this to February 28th. It's going to be a real short item because it's just come back and we'll vote on it and be done. So I see they're okay with that. So Commissioner Farini, you want to?
So, Chair Blau, I'm getting sorry to interrupt. I'm getting information from staff in order to package that information and get it back to the commission. Working with the applicants and the stuff, we're looking at March 14th hearing, which is in Santa Maria.
The applicant is nodding affirmative.
Well, we don't have anything else March 14th. Do you anticipate having other things that day?
Yeah.
Because the other thing I could do is go to March 7th and just have it here. I don't know if it's up to, if it's important to them to get this done sooner than later. I would rather see Commissioner Farini take it the 7th.
It's kind of, can staff get it processed in time?
This is way too easy to process. Yeah. It's up to you guys. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care.
So we'll work with the applicants to, if you want to set it for March 7th. It is going to be a little bit of a stretch for staff to meet the review cycles, but if the applicant agrees with March 7th, then we can do March 7th.
It's kind of a compromise date. I think that's good. And so yes, that would be the motion, is that we uphold the appeal and ask staff to develop findings and come back to us on March 7th.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Freeney, I would recommend that the motion would be to continue the item to March 7th, and then on that date, your commission would uphold the appeal and approve the project, since we don't have any materials to uphold the appeal today.
As so stated, then I amend.
So do I have a second? Second. We have a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Villalobos, read the call.
Commissioner Park.
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney. Aye. Commissioner Freeney.
Aye.
Commissioner Brown.
Aye.
Chair Blau.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Good. Okay, I think, could we get a time estimate on the next item by chance?
Chair Blau, can we take a couple-minute break so we
Sure,
can
find
coordinate
out
with...
for me, yeah. I'm just trying to decide whether we're going to break for lunch now or not have a lunch and just get through it. I think, I think we'll do the latter if it's short enough, because Commissioner Brown needs to leave, and I think she wants to, if she could stay, that'd be great. Take 5 minutes, yeah. Okay, we're back on the record. Mr. Villalobos, if you read item 3 into the record.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department that the County Planning Commission recommend that the Board of Supervisors that the Board adopt ordinance case number 16 ORD 14 and 16, and with the proposed ordinance amendments revising existing development standards and permit procedures in order to implement recent state legislation regarding ADUs.
Okay, and before we start, Commissioner Cooney has a question of staff.
I know some of you were here and heard a public comment earlier in the day about various issues, one of which was to continue this matter, to permit more active participation by members of the Montecito community. And my question is whether there is something about the processing of the ADU in terms of time, compliance with state law, or anything else that would require us to hear today as opposed to, or at least conclude the hearing today without the opportunity for those most concerned with the Montecito portions of the ordinance, the recommendations to us being fully vetted. Is there any reason why we couldn't grant a continuance for, say, a month and let everybody in Montecito that might be interested in speaking to this a better chance to participate?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Cooney, I would only point out that the bulk of the regulations affecting Montecito within the inland area have already been determined. The Montecito Planning Commission has already made a recommendation to the board. The only thing before your commission today is the portion within the Montecito Community Plan area that also lies within the coastal zone.
So we could proceed with the hearing today and leave open the conclusion as to whether we would accept or reject the recommendations of the Montecito Planning Commission for a continued hearing.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Cooney, we are trying to get these ordinances to the Board of Supervisors for their adoption because currently, at this point, at least within the inland area, we have no local regulations that regulate accessory dwelling units since the state law declared our existing regulations null and void. So all we are operating on currently is just the basically the bare bones provisions of the statute and what we can use within the statute to determine whether or not an application for an ADU should be approved or denied. Following your hearing, what our plan is, because the Board of Supervisors, when they were considering similar ordinances in September, directed us to submit the ordinances to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for their review. If your commission does act today on the ordinances, we would then submit the draft ordinances to Article 2, the County Land Use and Development Code, and the the Montecito Land Use and Development Code to State HCD for their review. We expect that would take a couple of months, and then once they conclude their review, then we'll schedule the item before the Board of Supervisors for the board to ultimately adopt the ordinances. So there will be a significant period of time prior to the board's action in which citizens of Montecito may weigh in if they want to on the proposed ordinance before your commission today. I would also point out that at the Montecito Planning Commission hearing, I believe there was one member of the audience present to discuss the matter. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest in these ordinances from the citizens.
Well, Mr. Engel, I disagree. I think the Montecito Association has a lot of concern with the differences between what staff has proposed and what the Montecito Planning Commission has proposed. I've talked to them, and you know, the land use chair of the Montecito Commission, of the Montecito Association, is busy digging out her home and the homes of her neighbors today, and that's why she can't be here. I mean, it just seems to me that there is interest. I don't think we're throwing up false reason for a continuance, and I'd like to do as much as we can to move things along, as you suggest. But ultimately, the coastal provision of this ordinance is not going to be approved even when the board agrees to it. So, I mean, we're talking years. So I really object to the concept that we can't be flexible in terms of moving forward, and I would object. I, for one, have thought carefully about the suggestions proposed by the Montecito Planning Commission, and I think notwithstanding the comments of one or more supervisors that they would like to see everything be similar, there's some merit in those, and I'd like to have the public speak to that. So in any event, I think you've done an adequate job of explaining the problems, and I at least would push for continuing any decision on the coastal portion of the proposed ordinance to at least a month away.
I'll just weigh in and say I don't want to sit here and do this twice if I don't have to. So if you feel that strongly about it, I think I'm in favor of continuing it now, and they can come back and put the Montecito folks on notice and that we're doing that, and I would support the continuance. Commissioner Farini.
I would support a continuance. I felt compelled when the lady from the public spoke to us, and you know, those people have been through a lot, and a little more time. A little more time.
And I will also point out that I'm, at least in the North County, I'm not seeing or hearing of any rush to build secondary units. I think a lot of people are sitting back waiting to see what it's going to look like, what the ordinance are. Commissioner Park, do you have your finger on your switch?
Yes, I think what I'm hearing is that several commissioners would rather just continue the hearing and not start today. I think I agree with that. I would look forward to Commissioner Brown's comments, and I think I would not hear many of them if you have to go.
I concur.
Yeah.
Yeah, I concur with continuing it.
Mr. Wells, do you have further to say?
No, it's at your discretion if you want to do a continuance. We were just looking at potential dates, and especially, I think today we've heard a number of commissioners are going to be absent on future dates. So when you're coming up with a decision on when you want to continue it, I think we want to take that into consideration as well. Because I think I heard that Commissioner Park may be absent the 7th, and Commissioner Brown is absent the 14th of March.
The 28th only has one item on there. Now it has two because we continued the 28th, March 28th. When are you here, Commissioner Park? When were you going to be absent?
And Chair Blau, just a reminder that before we take a motion on a continuance, that we do public comment.
I will do that. So I'll go ahead and ask, does anyone from the public wish to speak on this issue? And if you would, could you fill out a speaker slip and put it in the, it's in there? Okay, great, thank you.
I did. Commissioners, my name is Darlene Bierig. I'm actually a former land use chair of the Montecito Association. Thank you for delaying this item. There has been a tremendous push to by the MPC. I and a number of people were still dislocated because of ash removal at the January 3rd meeting of MPC. So I heard a staff member say that there's no interest in the community. There is huge interest, but many of us were still dislocated from the Thomas Fire evacuation. So thank you for, it appears you're going to postpone and be reasonable. The January 3rd meeting was ridiculous. One commissioner was missing, another was seated for the first time on the MPC, and many of us just couldn't attend, even though we've followed this for months now. So thank you, and I hope you do delay this. Thank you.
Great. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Please. Oh, yeah, sorry. He's new.
Good morning, Chair Blau and commissioners and staff. Thank you for listening to us today. We agree. We're very pleased that you're postponing this. There is a lot of interest, and it's very important. My name is Cassandra Ensberg, and I am an architect practicing in Santa Barbara for over 20 years, and I represent a team of local architects in the American Institute of Architects, Santa Barbara chapter. We advocate for an uncomplicated regulation that abides by the state laws that encourage and realize as many ADUs as possible. We would like to see a standalone document, something that's more simple and easy for regular folks to understand. Our team has written a letter to you that you should have in your packet that identifies 8 key areas: septic, special problems areas, coastal development permit, 120-day review, landmark buildings and structures of merit, ADUs in front yards, maximum ADU living area, and maximum lot coverage. Our letter addresses our position on each of these. I will briefly mention 3 areas where we support the staff's recommendations. My colleagues also here today will comment on other areas. As far as the ADU in the front yards, many homes are successfully designed with structures or carriage houses proud of the main house, and we feel that this prohibition should not be added, which is in accord with the staff, I believe. Maximum ADU living area, we agree with 8% of the lot area as staff recommends. The maximum size suggested by the Montecito Planning Commission in most cases is too small to be helpful. Maximum lot coverage, again, we support staff's recommendation not to add this requirement. Whatever you want to call ADUs, granny flats, or garden suites, we desperately need them to help our housing crisis. Please work to keep these requirements easy to understand and to achieve as many ADUs as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Everett Woody.
Chair Blau, just as a matter of note, I think the public comments is just on the continuance, not on the actual ordinance today.
Well, actually,
so I think where the public comment was on the potential motion for a continuance, not on the actual ordinance today.
well, the fact they're here all day and waited 3 hours, I'm going to let them give their comments, and you can deal with them as you want. Mr. Woody, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chairman Blau, members of the Commission. I just want to read a section of the California statute. It says, no other ordinance, policy, or regulations shall be the basis for the denial of a building permit or use permit under this subdivision. I think that language is pretty clear. I've had a project that has been under review with the county for over 9 months now. I just received, prior to walking into this meeting, which I have in your packet, a denial based upon the ADU having a septic system. So I think the passage from the statute that I just read clearly defines that as a non-basis for denial of the ADU. As I go further into my packet, here's a passage that was sent from HCD to the City of Santa Barbara, but it's along the same lines. And it says converting existing space. ADUs in converted existing spaces must be approved regardless of zoning and development standards. The development standards that the Health and Human Services or the Environmental Services Director has stated completely are contrary to the state law and the ordinance. And they further state that because they have this ordinance in place with regards to 2.5 acre minimums, that accessory dwelling units are second units. Accessory dwelling units are not secondary units. They're accessory to the primary unit. So again, I don't know why the project is being denied with regards to that. Secondly, I had another project that was in the coastal zone, and miraculously that one just got approved, and it was predicated upon this Coastal Commission memo that is in the packet that I passed out to you guys. And it says it would be a mistake for local governments with certified LCPs to interpret this as a signal that they can simply disregard the new law in the coastal zone. I think that's pretty clear too. So when I picked up the packet today, just regarding not the inland zone, but the coastal zone, and I see that that packet is that thick, who could possibly go through that and interpret that to comply with the state law? There's just too much there. My recommendation would be, when you guys reconvene, is to take a really good look at the proposed ordinance in the land use area and the coastal area, and ask staff to go back and revisit the current ordinance. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Valerie, is it Frushner?
Hello, Chair Blau and Commissioners. Thank you for hearing us, even though you've chosen to continue it, and we are very supportive of the continuation of this item. My name's Valerie Froscher. I'm an architect, and I have also served on county design review boards for over 20 years, so I've been very actively involved in the County of Santa Barbara. I'm an AIA member and have been involved with the AIA subcommittee working with the City of Santa Barbara as well, for helping to improve ordinance changes to the state law. We feel strongly that the state of California, and particularly our own community, is not coming close to meeting our needs for housing. As was evidenced in the recent disaster, many emergency personnel and community employees were flown or trained in because they cannot live in their own community. It should be a top priority to allow this form of low-density neighborhood infill housing to be easy to obtain. The state is trying to encourage this. We all share a common goal to create compatible, low-impact additional housing in our neighborhoods. But we would ask that there be more time and input from the community and from the architectural community to try to simplify the ordinance and simplify the process so that people can in fact get permits. Of the 8 issues that were in the AIA letter today, I'll just speak to 2 of them. One is the special problems area, that the rationale for limiting development in special districts and problems areas, so soil stability, access, high fire habitat, should be analyzed at a smaller scale to determine with precision what portions of these problem areas ADUs should not be allowed in and where they could be allowed. A blanket prohibition does not comply with the intent of the state legislation. And then the other item is the 120-day review. We've been working with the city a lot on that, and they have developed a kind of stopwatch program. So while they're reviewing it, the clock is ticking because the state has asked that permits be issued within 120 days. That's very difficult to do. So while they're reviewing it, the clock is going. When they turn it back to the applicant with corrections, the clock stops. The applicant makes their changes and improvements, and then the clock starts again. But a lot of people all around the city area are having problems with over a year to get a permit. So And the state really wants to have that be streamlined. And for it to be fully ministerial, and it can be a ministerial checklist that design review people can help shape, that so that people will know how to design a neighborhood compatible structure. So thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? And if you will give me a speaker slip before you leave, it'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. There were a lot of speaker slips in the back, so that's why we didn't fill them out.
Oh, they're out of them?
Yes.
David will get some more for you.
Yeah, I'm Alex Pucho. I met you before. I'm speaking in support of the comments made previously, specifically those made by Valerie Froscher, with whom I serve in the SBAR, the South Coast Board of Architectural Review. I share all those concerns and the reasons why we need more ADUs throughout the county. Of the 8 items, I would like to speak about number 5, review of structures 50+ years old. I've served for 8 years in the City of Santa Barbara Landmarks Commission, and I'm very familiar with historic structures reports, structure of merits, landmarks, and so forth. But your recommendation seems to include everything, whether it's designated or not designated, unless I read incorrectly. Anything built after 1967, which is a huge amount of buildings that you may want to take a closer look at. Considering that, as indicated in the letter, considering that the landmarks HLAC meets what is the once a month, that will add to the 120 days considerably. And so something else needs to be done, and strict guidelines need to be established and enforced. The last thing I'd like to mention, and I know my time is up, is to pay a little bit of attention to the owner occupancy requirement. The city is considering some kind of a sunset clause. After the unit is built, occupied, met some design standards, the owner lives there, then maybe 3 years afterwards, or 4 or 5 or sometime, that requirement sunsets and it becomes different. That would cut all speculation concerns about this type of deals. Thank you very much for your turn.
Commissioner Brown has a question for you.
Yes.
Hi, Alex.
Yes.
How are you?
Cecilia.
A question for you on the historic issue. You know, it's a problem because one doesn't really know. Some homes may have some historic features, as you know, that are worth preserving, some may not. Is there some sort of simple checklist or something that staff could look at that would help the process of making a determination up front? And the reason I ask that, in the Eastern Goleta Valley Community Plan in the back, there's a listing of all properties that sort of they were built from whenever to whenever. And so there's already sort of a listing. But how would you do it so it could be sort of more ministerial?
For one thing, you may want to reconsider the 50 years. That is 1967. You may want to extend that maybe to 75. That's just to simplify things a little bit.
But I think that's
besides that, more to the point of your question, I know how the city works on this aspect. They do have a historian on board. There's a staff member. And you submit photographs and they take a look, say, yeah, this looks fine. And that can be done really fast. Or you could have a consultant. Okay. But to have a board member or some volunteer, it makes it more complicated.
That's great. Okay.
Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you for your deferral, Denise Spengler Adams, and I have not met you before, but in the late 70s and early 1980s, I worked on the original Granny Flat Ordinance, which was then authored by Assemblywoman Kathy Wright of CME. I was Director of Public Policy for the California Association of Homes for the Aging, and we adopted this Granny Flat Ordinance hoping to take some pressure off our skilled nursing facilities. And if you recall, that was after Latterman Petrus Shore and emptying out our mental health hospitals. So we were looking for alternative solutions. So basically, as a gerontologist, that's my background. But I come to you today as a 37-year, or almost, I guess now, 38-year resident of Montecito. And The new ADU ordinance has a lot of issues in it, and I have been in regular communication with Greg Nicholas, who's at the Housing and Community Development staff person assigned to implement this. And I want to underscore for you the comments made by the Board of Architectural Review, items 2 and 4. Items 2, which was the special problems area, which the city is attempting to blanket out all categorically high fire areas. The state of California is not going to allow that. You have to have public safety issues why a certain area you cannot build on. You can't just say 3/4 of the city. We went through this at the Montecito Planning Commission level, and most of Montecito, as you know, if you're not in the coastal area, you're in a fire area. So we're going to have to look at that in the context as presented to you on item number 2. Item number 4, the 120-day review process, it was flawed at the state level. It's impossible to review something in 120 days. If staff gives it back to me, the applicant, and I can't perform, which now I want to tell you, I cannot perform. My engineer is busy working on a disaster. He's already told me he's wrapped up probably for the next year. Staff has returned mine in the building permit. I already have a condition, the land use permit, so I'm good to go. I'm in the building process. I have some issues that need to be cleared up by the engineer architect, but now he's pulled off over here because he's worked for the county before for years, approximately 35, so he can't get to me. There's other more pressing priorities, which is why I asked you to respectfully consider, when you're already in the process, granting an extension. I think the testimony of AIA, and I know my participation at the city level, where their recommendation, the clock stops when it gets back to, this is really rude, I'm sorry, this was unnecessary, I'm sorry. When the clock stops when they give it back to the applicant, because if the applicant can't perform, which those of us in Montecito right now are going to have trouble accessing our engineers and architects, it would be helpful to consider paralleling the city's program, where if it's the ball's in our court, we're not, the whole system, the program's not penalized. No one can do this 120 days. I've also, county staff can't possibly review all these without subcontracting out the work. I know my project got subcontracted out, and they're not going to be able to get to it either, because these people that are homeless due to the disaster need to take priority over me and my ADU. So anyway, those are some of the things I would respectfully ask that you consider, and lastly, again, giving some kind of special consideration to the Montecito people to give us a blanket extension on the time. I'm in the system, and I've been told by staff person 1, oh, I need to have my caissons in my ADU in order to comply with the 2-year timeline. And there's no way I'm going to get caissons in, because right now, whether it's KC, cement company in town, everybody's busy. So I can't meet those requirements. So I'm asking you as a body to please look at specifics in how we're implementing our law, so that people in Montecito right now are not penalized. Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to ask one question to staff, and you can give me the answer next time. Well, actually, maybe 2 questions. But I think the 120 days she was referring to is the time that the city or the county has in order to do the processing. I think that's what state says. So yes, it would be appropriate if they stop the clock. That's actually to your benefit. The fact you need more than 120 days, that's fine. But what we're trying to do is to do it so that we get it turned around right quick like. The other thing I'll just give you some heads up on is county council is going to have to convince me that if we do this requiring owner occupancy in order to do the RSU, how you're possibly going to enforce that and what the penalties are. I know it's been done in other municipalities, and I can't figure out for the life of me how they're going to do that. Just a heads up that it's going to be, I mean, it's not something I'm probably going to agree to unless you show me some remedy that makes some sense. So, okay, Mr. Cooney, did you want to make a motion for the continuance?
Do we have a date to suggest, Mr. Wilson? Have you had a chance to look again? I'm not looking at a long delay, but just the immediacy of the reoccupation of Montecito suggests that it's too soon to do it during February, so.
So look at the projection report, Chair Cooney, Chair Blau and Commissioner Cooney. I forgot what year I was in, sorry. So looking at the projection report, March 7th is a Santa Barbara hearing, but I understand Commissioner Park is going to be absent that day. The next hearing would be in Santa Maria, March 14th, and I understand Commissioner Brown is absent that day. So it looks like the next hearing would be March 28th, that so far everybody is going to be here at.
March 28th sounds good.
So, thank you. I would make the motion to continue this hearing in all its aspects to the 28th of March 2018.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. I believe we are ready to adjourn for today. Anything else, Mr. Wilson? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Chair Bob, no, I think